So my questions are: to become a midwife, do you need to be a nurse first? You've answered those questions actually quite well. To become a midwife, do I need to go through an institution? To become a midwife, do I need to work in a hospital? When I gave birth to my eldest child, my son, who's now 14 years old, so 14 years ago, at home, my mother, who was a lay midwife, attended me. That whole experience planted the seed of midwifery for me in my heart. On paper, I've only been a midwife for 2 years, but in my heart, I've been a midwife since that birth 14 years ago. I'm a certified professional midwife, so I went through the NARM training. It's an American qualification. It specializes in out-of-hospital and home births. It's apprenticeship-based, so you apprentice yourself to a midwife, you immerse yourself in a private midwife practice, you work at birth centers. There's no time limit as to how long you can do it for. You're given reams of paperwork to fill out. It took me 4 years. I know people who've taken much longer, and some people have taken shorter. I'm very proud to hold this qualification. It's held by Anna Mae Gaskin and the Farm Midwives. It's held by Robin Lim, CNN, who won the CNN Hero Award. It's held by Vicky Penwell, who runs Mercy in Action in the Philippines. The midwives who hold this qualification have good outcomes. They have excellent statistics, they're passionate, and they're pioneers in their field. Why did I choose this route? It seems very complicated. Why did it take me 14 years to get to that place? Training in a hospital really wasn't an option for me. It may be for others, but for me it really, really wasn't. I really wanted to experience birth in its own environment, and I wanted to experience it at its own pace. And when I came across the NARM training, it spoke to that seed in my heart. Other inspirations for me in this training were my mother. She did something very simple while I was growing up. She made women feel safe while sitting with them until their babies were born. And that obviously left quite an impression. And she did the same for me. Then there was Karen Clark, who was my midwife as well, and whose lioness strength seems to keep the baddies at bay at a birth. I'm also very inspired by her project, The Bus Fair Babies, which for me really is the ideal model. I really believe very strongly in bringing midwives back into the communities rather than taking mothers out of their communities to give birth. And then, of course, Michel Odent, the doctor and surgeon who suddenly noticed that the stark white environment in the hospital wasn't conducive to women in labor, and slowly started changing the environments where women gave birth. But a big inspiration for me to become a midwife is a community I live near. It's on the top of Red Hill. It's an informal settlement. It's right in the deep south near Cape Point, where we regularly get broken into by baboons. There's lots of fynbos, surfers. But yeah, there's this informal settlement. It's made up very much of a community from the Eastern Cape who've moved there for work. Lots of Malawian and Zimbabwean refugees. But one thing I started noticing driving past there and picking up hitchhiking women, pregnant hitchhiking women, was that there was no transport for them to go for their regular checkups at their local hospital, and that when they were in labor, they had to pay someone between 300 and 500 rand to take them to their nearest hospital. A lot of them have avoided antenatal care for those reasons, but also because of the treatment that they got. A lot of them also were afraid of accessing their hospitals because a lot of women came back with traumatic stories, so there was a lot of fear. So it was very much a driving force for me to become a midwife. At the moment, we formed a women's group between Scarborough, Glencairn and Red Hill. It was very much inspired by a group called Cape Town Embrace, who are actually nominated as a birth hero here. So what we do is, well, how it started was that we met regularly on a Saturday afternoon for tea and cake, and would just chat. Many issues came up: unemployment, lack of transport, no food, children having to travel far, having to walk far to get to school, a lack of resources. And then obviously these issues of these pregnant and labouring women. So what have we done about that? We've created a network. So in Scarborough there are a few doulas. So what we've created is a network of doulas to support those mothers who need to get to the hospital. So a lift in labour, and then if they want the option of a doula to stay with them, to go with them. We have this thing called the keepers in Scarborough, where a few people have walkie-talkies that they communicate about crime. So if someone's been spotted taking a bicycle or stealing someone's gas bottle, then they all communicate with each other and they have fun sort of catching the culprit. But what we're putting in place now is that we can also communicate when somebody's in labour, and that we can try and provide a lift to a woman in labour if she needs to get to the hospital. Then the other thing that we have are the pear tree project bags, another nominee for the birth hero. It's a beautiful cloth bag, handmade, with provisions for new mothers and baby. So we've been able to hand those out to new mothers in Red Hill. And then along with Robin Sheldon and the Compassionate Birth Project, next year we'll be providing a doula training in the community as well, because it would be really lovely if the mothers could support each other in labour. There is a clinic there, but it's only open on a Tuesday and only for vaccinations. So it's, unfortunately not something, it's something I'm working on, but at present it's not a place where mothers can get their antenatal checkups done. There are a handful of women who've approached me for home births. So far they've all been Zimbabwean. Traditionally they do give birth at home, and I've been taking care of Angela, Jolene and Marlon. Angela's mother is actually a traditional midwife in Zimbabwe, and she had her first baby at home in Zim, which she said was pain-free because her mother was so kind. And then with her second one, she was in South Africa, and that was a BBA, a born before arrival. And when she arrived in hospital with the baby, she had this very negative reaction to the fact that her baby had been born before she got to the hospital. So she asked me if I would attend her third baby at home. And yeah, it was really lovely. She'd avoided going to she'd booked once and had been for a second appointment and then started avoiding it because she wasn't allowed to take her child with her into antenatal checkups. And he was I think he was 18 months, so he was very young, still very, wanted to be with his mother, and they actually would make her leave him outside the room while he screamed. So that was very traumatic for both of them. So I would visit her at her home, which was through this sort of alleyway of shacks. She's perched on top of these rocks in her tin shack, and we'd have tea, and I'm quite au fait now with Nigerian soap operas. We'd watch those and eat popcorn and interact with her children. So she had her baby 2 weeks ago. The baby was a little bit early, 37 plus 4. It was a little girl, 2,410 grams, but she came out and just responded to the world. She had delayed cord clamping, she had skin to skin, she had a physiological third stage. And when I I checked up on her 24 hours later when she was a little bit shell-shocked from the experience. But on day 3, when I went to visit her, she said, "I am so happy." And that obviously is the best response that a midwife can get. I propose that we do bring back traditional midwifery and integrate the apprenticeship-based training and really make it our own. Let's Africanize it. Let's make it part of who we are. I really think it's a very valid form of training with good outcomes. To train midwives in their own communities makes sense. To get to know the women that you live with and work with, their bodies, their babies. I did a radio interview, a month or 2 ago, and it was supposed to be just about pregnancy and birth in general, but when home birth was mentioned, these Muslim aunties just kept calling in. And one old lady said, "I'm standing in my kitchen, and I'm peeling my potatoes, and I remembered, I had a home birth 60 years ago." And they all just kept talking about this midwife who lived down the road and who would arrive on their bicycle, and how they'd known her, they'd grown up with them around, and how familiar she was, and what a fantastic experience those were. And and questioning, why are our daughters having cesareans? Why are my granddaughters ending up with cesareans? And I don't understand. I believe that midwifery training doesn't have to be traumatic. I think it often is. Midwifery training does not have to be in a hospital. Midwifery training does not need to focus on fear and what can go wrong, because most of the time birth is actually very straightforward and normal and lovely. And the big question that everyone always asks, so how does one register in South Africa? After a year and a half of doing the whole SACWA thing, because you have to go to SACWA first, and then SANC will only look at your paperwork, they said, no, sorry, you can't register in South Africa. You didn't go through school. That's what I do. And so I decided to look at the traditional midwifery route, TBAs, all of that. And I came across the Traditional Doctors Union. And one of the things they do is they register traditional midwives. So I applied, and I'm now registered as a traditional midwife in South Africa. So yeah, thank you for that, because a lot of the responses have been like sort of poo-poo or just a traditional midwife and how are you going to get the medical aids to cover you. I have a practice number. I'm allowed to write sick notes, and I am allowed to sign a birth declaration. So those three things I'm allowed to do. At the moment, I'm working with women who live in tin shacks on rocks and sand. I'm not worried about medical aids. I really wear that badge with pride of being a traditional midwife. I'm African, and I want to honor my African traditions. And lastly, if traditional means honoring the roots of midwifery to be with women, then I'm all for it. Thank you.